Well, today I won't be apologising for the birds because they're smart. It's very windy, so obviously they are keeping themselves safe. What I'm interested in today is I want to talk about the power of the unknown demonstrator. Now, how have I come to this particular subject? Well, I was given a book over Christmas and New Year to look at called Dreamers and Schemers, which theoretically is a book regarding Australia's history since colonisation began in 1788. Look, I've really wasted too many hours looking at it. It's not the type of book that I think gives you much idea of what's going on. And the main reason is that most of the accounts in this large volume are accounts about the so-called movers and shakers and those who exercise power. And now, when I was in Iceland in 2015, something which I found quite fascinating was that in front of the Icelandic Parliament House there is a large rock, kind of a triangular rock, which is split down the middle, and it's an installation for the unknown demonstrator. Obviously, Icelandic governments understand the power of people who are normally forgotten, written out of history. Because we need to remember that every major advance in civilisation has come through people taking action and creating the circumstances which force those who exercise power to make significant changes to improve their lives. And nothing highlights this more than what's happened in Australia since 1975, when we've seen people are relatively content to work up the right channels and not actually take to the streets to raise particular issues. And we are seeing this during the privatisation, deregulation, corporatisation, the globalisation revolution which has swept the country. Where we as a people have accepted the idea that if we wait for governments and the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, they will eventually do the right thing by us. But every available indicator has shown people that we are more indebted. It is much more difficult to keep a roof over your head. Work has become fragmented, unreliable, and if it wasn't for the ability to buy money, that's what lending is actually buy money, that most people wouldn't be able to survive. So obviously, during this last 45 years, we have seen both institutional legislation passed to ensure that protesting becomes a criminal act. The first thing you may have noticed is the diminishing public space around the country. I'll give you a few ridiculous examples. In Victoria, Federation Square, which was built by public money, is managed by a private organisation, and people theoretically need permission to hold demonstrations. Southern Cross Station, which is the largest railway network in Victoria, is basically privatised. And what we find is that only 90 centimetres, that's right, 90 centimetres of the extensive footpath outside Southern Cross Station is public space, which is available for people to demonstrate in. And obviously we've challenged this through the Wednesday Action Group on a number of occasions. But the reality is this, that public space is shrinking. The commons, the concept of a commons, of land which is held in common, has almost disappeared. And then we have a slew of legislation which has gone through Parliament over the last 30 to 40 years, which, as I've consistently said on these YouTube presentations, that has made striking illegal in this country. And if you look at the history of change, especially radical change in this country, that history revolves around people being able to freely remove their labour to improve their situation. Then we have legislation which has basically criminalised the right to strike in this country. You can only strike during an enterprise bargaining agreement period after you've jumped through a number of hoops. And there's other legislation which is quite extraordinary for a so-called democratic country, where you can be taken off the streets, interrogated for 7 days, because the authorities believe you may have information which may assist their investigations. Now we have legislation to be put in place in Victoria which will make the wearing of the colours by bikie groups illegal. When will they ban the Eureka flag? And the list goes on and on and on. So the ability to take action has decreased, and as the ability to take action has decreased, the problems faced by people have increased. When I talked about this book, Dreamers and Schemers, it was lauded by the government gilded ABC and the corporate-owned media. The fact is that it has forgotten the movers and shakers. It talks about the leaners. It has forgotten those unknown individuals, those unknown groups who have through the ages been the catalyst for change. And this is not something which we should be surprised about. Because if people begin to understand that change comes through action, change comes through protest, change comes through sit-ins, change comes through revolt and rebellion, then the authorities will have a great deal of difficulty containing people's activity. And while we become fixated on sporting events, what's occurring on social media, what's the latest, Married at First Sight on free-to-air television, you begin to understand that the possibility of change becomes impossible. You see, hope, which is the catalyst for change, is the love child of desire and expectation. The desire for change and the expectation that change will occur. So when you become resigned to the fact that change is impossible, that you can't fight City Hall, that it's always this way, that when we forget that the social security system we currently enjoy is there because of agitation and because of strikes and actions which led to hundreds if not thousands of people being ostracised, blacklisted, jailed, you begin to understand what the situation is. And any history, any purported history of this country which ignores, which forgets about the unknown demonstrator, which forgets those pivotal moments which were responsible for many of the things we take for granted today, like social security benefits, unemployment benefits, single parents benefits, education allowance, access to a universal health system, we begin to understand that how important that unknown demonstrator is. And it's quite ironic that a little country like Iceland, with about 350,000 people, understands the power of the unknown demonstrator in one of the only installations in front of their parliament is that installation which honours the unknown demonstrator, because they understand that although they are representatives, ultimate political authority doesn't come from Parliament or the government of the day or the Constitution. It comes from people taking concerted, concentrated action. So any historical account which ignores that push for change, which ignores the unknown demonstrator, and which ignores people who've devoted their lives to change, who ashes are scattered across the country, who are buried, forgotten around the land. And again, this is not something that is new. This country was based on a lie, terra nullius, the land of no one. This country continues to be based on the lie that it's only a private investment for private profit mantra which will satisfy a human need in this country. This country is based on the lie that we live in a free society. This country is based on the lie that radical activists are nothing more than troublemakers. The fact is, without those people who are willing to take that first step towards change, change would not occur. And to dismiss the process which leads to positive, human-focused change is to deny ourselves the possibility of believing that change is desirable, but not only desirable but possible. So today in this YouTube presentation, I want you to remember those pivotal moments, those people who gave their lives, those people who gave their time, those people who believed that change was possible, those people who made a radical egalitarian change possible, those people who are responsible for parliaments at the state and federal level being forced to pass a legislation to look after individual human needs. And in a country where there is no constitutional protection for the individual from the arbitrary exercise of state power, and Australia is the only Western democracy without any constitutional protections for the individual from the arbitrary exercise of state power, the role of the protester, the role of the radical thinker, the role of the radical intellectual, the role of people with a different viewpoint in terms of human progress becomes fundamental to the struggle for change. And it's quite ironic that in an era of instant communication, in an era of social media, in an era where your phone can tell you everything you want, through the internet, in an era when we can see what happens around the world in an instant, in an era where theoretically we have access to knowledge, that ignorance, stupidity reign. Not only ignorance and stupidity, which is forgivable, but racism, ideas that denigrate people because they don't actually have an income, or are homeless, or owe money, or have no future. In an era when Although we have theoretically a public education system, private charities raise money in order to send Australian children to school, while other children, as I said last week, go to the best private schools, not just courtesy of their parents or guardians' resources, but courtesy of the Australian taxpayer. And these things will continue while we work up the right channels, while we wait for some guru, some religious leader, some political representative, some media celebrity to do the right thing by us. We need to understand that we are the people we've been waiting for. You can't rely on the state, the government of the day, our constitutional arrangements. You can't rely on parliamentary elections. We are the people we've been waiting for. And if you are interested in these concepts, I encourage you to join Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. Joining is particularly easy. But ultimately, what happens is dependent on what we do. Ultimately, what we enjoy today is the product of generations of struggle. It's the product of people who made sacrifices in order to ensure that we enjoy what we consider today to be privileges. Privileges like access to a public education sector, like access to public health, like access to public roads, and the list goes on and on. So in a society which is dominated by the private investment for private profit mantra, in a society where our DNA is based on the monetarisation of every human interaction and every human relationship, it's important that we remember that unknown protester and that we not only honour them, but become one of them.